All right, how's it going out there, folks? Welcome back here to a Saturday night. It is your Earthmaster out here, September 7th, 2024, about 10:30 p.m. local time here in California. Latest activity here across the globe shows some movement out into the 5.5 coming into the Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, and also over here across Vanuatu, getting a swarm of earthquake activity out here in a big fashion, right? I think today has been an understatement in terms of uptick here today. We've seen a lot of earthquake activity across many areas around the globe here, and more specifically out in the West Coast, California, and also this six-pointer that stirred up some activity out here in the area. I want to cover California first here. We'll get to the rest of this massive amount of earthquake activity here in a little bit. It's definitely been elevated, to say the least. Okay, so Southern California, we've seen a little bit of swarming going on out here across the area outside of Ontario. Due south of the Rancho Cucamonga area, I've got a swarm of about 41 earthquakes here. Really no main quake, right? It started off with a 3.5, but we had various other magnitudes, including a magnitude 3.9 that was larger than the 3.5, obviously. So we really can't say there was a main quake with an aftershock sequence out here, because there wasn't. There's a lot of earthquake activity occurring in a seismic swarm. Okay, about 41 earthquakes here in the total tally. If we go back and look here over the last 30 days, specifically of this area, well, there really hasn't been any earthquake activity here in the last 30 days. Because I'm trying to figure out exactly what Dr. Lucy Jones here is kind of chatting about. I want to show you guys real quick her Twitter account, or X account here, x.com. This was noted today on her social media account. Today we are having a small swarm in the Fontana seismicity area, northeast striking line of many small quakes. Today we have various magnitudes. I've seen this, there's a typo, this type of cluster in Fontana dozens of times in my decades watching SoCal earthquakes. Okay, this is downplaying the overall situation out here, right? Keeping everyone calm, right? It's just earthquake activity. It's Southern California, and it's doing a great job, right, of keeping everyone calm. And this is what worries me a little bit, because if you look at some of these replies right here by Dolores, in other words, another day in SoCal, and everyone's liking it and loving it, complacency, right? But we shouldn't be complacent because of what's been going on, not only today, but overall the seismic activity events that we have been seeing in a broad scale area of Southern California. If it was just a little bit of earthquake activity out here, that happens a lot. But it's not just that area. It's all around Southern California. It's a major plate boundary, right? The San Andreas Fault here. This is an 8.1 that can be produced here on this plate boundary. So all these seismic activity events that we've seen over the last few weeks here, including the 5.2 in Bakersfield, Ridgecrest activity, Puente Hills Thrust Fault, is a sign of something much bigger, I'm fearing. This earthquake activity occurred on an unknown fault. Well, unnamed is the fault system, right? So I went back and looked. There has been some earthquake activity out here, specifically in an unnamed active fault. So when we see earthquake activity out here, it's a little fracture zone, right, on the Pacific plate side of the plate boundary here, which is the San Andreas Fault. This area of Southern California is littered with a bunch, hundreds of fracture zones, and rightfully so, because you're looking at two major plates here, the Pacific and the North American plate here. And Southern California sits on a very small fraction of it, right? But it's capable of producing an 8.1. So within that plate boundary and outside of there, we get these fracture zones occurring on each side of the plate boundary. You can see them out here off Southern California and also on the North American side of the plate boundary. Those fracture zones are not happening just because it's a plate boundary. Well, maybe so, but they're increasing here. The plate boundary activity out here, the strain out here is increasing the earthquakes and the pressure across various fracture zones out here across Southern California. And that's what I'm talking about. We haven't seen any major release upon the monster itself, right? This is where supposedly this is where the plate boundary is. Not supposedly, this is where it is. And it builds up a lot of strain. Secondary fault systems here, all these fracture zones, sometimes can build up enough steam to produce earthquakes here, and that's what we're seeing here over the last few weeks. But that sign in itself is telling me that we need to watch the San Andreas Fault, because that's where most of the strain is accumulating, and that's where the big earthquakes take place. You're not going to see an 8-pointer on the Bakersfield Fault up here or on the San Jacinto Fault Zone. You're going to see it right there across the plate boundary where it's well overdue. We know that it's well overdue. It hasn't had a full rupture out here in over 300 years, so the calming down here is a little on the unnerving side when it comes to Dr. Lucy Jones just kind of downplaying. I've seen lots of swarms here, and I think it's her job to keep everyone calm, right? And we don't want to create panic, but also at the same time, this is unlike anything I've seen here in Southern California since I've been studying earthquakes out here. We haven't seen this much elevated earthquake activity out here since I've been doing this. So it has to mean something. Obviously, it's got a purpose to it. The question is, are we going to see a big earthquake this year, or is this merely just a lot of rainfall? All the rainfall that we've seen here over the last couple of years, soaking down into various faults out here, creating elevated earthquake activity with nothing to do with any major impending big earthquake. I don't believe that. I believe, if anything, we're seeing something much bigger about ready to take place out here across Southern California. We've seen various fracture zones out here, the fracture zones across western Mexico, and I think even in Arizona as well. Seen some fissure events take place out there. There's a lot going on out here, folks, and we're watching that pretty closely. I want to show you guys here real quick earthquake activity from, let me see what I put here real quick, from 1/1/2023 to today's time period. This is just in general Southern California. I know I covered a broader scale here back a couple nights back, but I wanted to cover this. This is last year, from January 1st of 2023 to today's date of last year. So we're looking at 9 months and 8 days? 8,170 earthquakes specifically in this area. And that includes some of those seismic swarms there in Southern California along the Brawley seismic zone. What I want to do now is type in today's event, right? Remember that number, okay? Let's go back and show you guys that number real quick. 8,000, I can't remember the exact number here, so I'm going to double check that. 8,170, okay? That's the number out there. And when we go and check out a new date this year to right now, let's see here, make sure I didn't accidentally end anything. I have a couple hotkeys here on the keyboard that sometimes get pushed. Yeah, so let's see what we got. 8,170. That's perfect. That's exactly where we set it. Let's take a look and see what our activity is for this year. So 8,170. Look where we're at right now compared to this time last year in the same amount of time period. Without, we really haven't seen a lot of swarming down here across this area. Well, I guess there is some down there in the Brawley seismic zone, but we had a few intense swarms there last year. So that accounted for a lot of the seismic activity. But overall, the picture here, 9,592 earthquakes in the same time period from January 1st this year to the current date compared to last year where we've seen 8,170. That's a lot of uptick if you think about that. That's 9,000, about 1,400 earthquakes more. That's a lot if you really think about it. So, you know, not only have the earthquakes increased, but the magnitudes have increased as well in terms of the the magnitude level. So obviously, as more earthquakes occur in the larger magnitude, then the possibility here of something larger takes place here. Dr. Lucy Jones discussed it, and I think, I know she doesn't want to cause any fear mongering, and I'm not here to cause fear mongering either. I'm here to inform everyone what's going on here in my observations and my studies. But I don't know. I think she knows more than what she's leading on there. She won't answer any of my calls, any of my questions when it comes to when the last earthquake occurred on the Puente Hills thrust fault in terms of the larger scale potential. So, account for everything that's going on here recently, folks. Just in the last 30 days of the Southern California area, we got 1,814 earthquakes, and a couple different specific regions that we were watching. The Bakersfield area, where we've seen the 5.2, the Puente Hills thrust fault that's seen a 4.4, and this area is capable back over here. This area is capable of producing a 7.5. So if you look at it, there's individual separate swarms here of intensifying earthquake activity. And what is around it? There's kind of an arrow shape right here, right? The Garlock Fault shear zone. This has a lot of strain built up on it, folks. I'm not even joking. That's not fear mongering. I'm getting more and more concerned about this as I see this daily activity out here in California. Something is probably going to happen out here. The question is exactly when, how big, and where. But it is all leading up to something much bigger, I feel. A little bit of earthquake activity right now, a little 0.8 just off the southern branch here of the San Andreas Fault. Got to remember, over 300 years, folks, and that's a lot of accumulation of strain here in this area. Nothing going on further south here, but got to remember that's a plate boundary. There's a lot of strain pushing up against it, and it's been accumulating for 300 years. I can only imagine how much slip rate has been accumulated here in this area. And I tried to find the specific fault system that this current activity is occurring on near the Rancho Cucamonga area, but it looks like unnamed fault near Fontana. I believe it's this one right here. You can see that little green section here. Kind of extends, at least over here, extends to the east of where the earthquake activity is occurring. The general earthquake activity is occurring right about here in terms of the events that we've seen today. Let me zoom in here real quick and show you guys again. That's occurring just due south of Rancho Cucamonga. I don't think there's any fracking operations out here. There's a whole housing development. I don't know what was out here before, but I'm sure these guys felt the earthquakes quite nicely that struck earlier this morning. Some of those earthquakes originally coming in as a 4.1. If you go over here and check out some of these details in terms of the magnitudes, they went with the error station. Only 4 stations here. They went with the, I don't know why, but they went with the lower magnitude here. Some of these stations, though, got 179 stations reporting 4.2, 19 stations reporting a 4.1. That's why originally this came in as a 4.1 earthquake, but they decided to go with one of the lowest reporting magnitude stations up here. Only 4 stations. So, but you got to remember, you got to account for the error rate out here. So, error rate is a little bit higher here in the 4.2 range when it comes to these stations out here. Look at that one station reporting a 4.9. Goodness. But, I'm not in charge of this stuff, folks. I don't work for the USGS. I just observe and report. And I've been studying this stuff enough to know, though, that things are on the uptick out here. And, that's one thing Dr. Lucy Jones has mentioned here, that we're entering into a phase, she feels, and I feel, many other folks feel, where we're going to see some elevated earthquake activity. It has been recently quiet in terms of larger scale and even moderate to minor activity out here in terms of 3.0 and above. But things have been on the uptick here in the last couple months, and I feel this is going to continue until we see something much bigger happen out here across the area. It's not just one specific area. I do not like that complacency right here. You know, this comment right here that said, right here, in other words, just another day in Southern California, right? But who knows? It's to be complacent like that is not a good thing, folks. You know, a lot of people are going to get hurt, and there's going to be a lot of damage out there because people are just expecting life to, you know, or at least earthquake activity to never really impact their area. But this area is capable of producing an 8.1 on the San Andreas Fault. The Puente Hills Thrust Fault is 7.5 underneath Los Angeles. Not to mention other various areas out here that are well overdue. So California, if you really think about it here, more specifically in southern portion of the state, it's a hazard waiting to happen, folks. That's just the facts. You know, we've been living in very complacent times. Everyone's got a job. Everyone's driving nice cars. Everyone's, you know, going to work, meeting friends and stuff like that. But that's all going to probably come to an end here once that big one hits here. It's going to be a very damaging earthquake. So we got to be prepared. Look at this little line of activity here across the Garlock Fault shear zone. I think this plays a major part here in the relation to the San Andreas Fault. It has to here because it intersects here. Look at that, the segment here that shoots northwestward. This is a Pacific plate boundary here. This area of land is moving off in this general direction. The North American plate here kind of moving off towards the southeast. But as a whole, the North American plate moving off towards the west southwest. But locally here to this plate boundary, you get that northwestward to southeastward motion here. And 300 years of 4 inches a year, I think, somewhere around there. That can be a lot of strain. So this, you know, it's not no joke, folks. It's not fear mongering. It's not me just telling stories. It's me trying to just alert people that things could get potentially much worse here soon in the Southern California area. Mount Shasta. What's going on up here at this volcano? Northern California's volcano out here. It's a beautiful volcano. It hasn't erupted in the past 400 or 500 years, I think. Mount Lassen back in the early 1900s, if I remember right. But yeah, we got a little bit of earthquake activity here across Mount St. Helens, or Mount Shasta, excuse me. That activity within the volcano range here, you can see the land rising there due to the volcanic activity throughout time. I pulled up, let me go over here and check out the where did we go? USGS map here. All right, volcano still at green, nothing major going on here, but there's a couple earthquakes here in the southeastern area of Mount Shasta. Now the seismograph station here, this is kind of interesting. There was a little period of earthquake activity. There's the 2.1 and the 2.0 that occurred about 8 and 7 o'clock in the morning, okay? So those are going to be somewhat of the larger seismograph signatures here. But if you look here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe 12 earthquakes or so in this little sequence of events that stirred up early this morning. So the USGS reporting 2 earthquakes, but there's more than that. That's why I like to check out these seismograph stations here, because they record the real data. And even though those may be smaller than 2.0, they are still earthquakes. And they're probably along the lines of a 1.1. They look about half the size of a 2-pointer here. So probably about 1.0 and below for the remainder of some of these earthquakes. But nonetheless, hey, they're earthquakes, right? And that's what we got to keep an eye on. There's nothing major going on there. I don't think we're seeing anything in terms of inflation. Let's go double check that here across Mount Shasta. I haven't checked that out in a while. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of seismograph stations out, or GPS stations out here along this area. where the earthquake activity is occurring. So we would have to check the southern flank here. A little bit of an uptick here in terms of inflation in the last couple recordings. And if you look at it, some of those readings are higher than any readings before, up to about 2011 or so. So maybe something going on up there. We've seen a lot of Cascadia tremor recently. And one may ask, well, what does the Cascadia subduction zone have to do with volcanoes in Northern California or across the Cascades? Well, that's why they're there. That's why we have volcanoes, is because of the subducting landmass here. You got the Juan de Fuca plate as a whole here. There's actually 3 little separate plates that used to be much bigger. The Explorer plate up here to the north, Juan de Fuca plate here in the middle, the larger of the 3, and the Gorda plate, very small microquake or a microplate here, that's slowly disappearing underneath the North American plate. But all that landmass there is melting down into the deeper areas below. And of course, voila, you get these earthquakes and volcanoes there across the Cascade volcanic range, Mount Shasta included. Mount Adams, you got various volcanoes up here across the area of the Cascades, and that's all due to the subduction zone offshore here, the Cascadia. And that's been somewhat elevated out here recently, so it makes sense there to see a little bit of elevated movement in the deeper areas of some volcanoes. This activity today there in Mount Shasta, about 5 miles here below the surface. That would be somewhere where the magma chamber would be at, but it's off towards the southeast here, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. Well, I haven't really seen any earthquake activity there across Mount Shasta in a little while. Eventually, things will kick up. We've been living in some very quiet times. Mount St. Helens, a couple smaller earthquakes around the vicinity. Far as Cascadia goes, as I shown you here, there is not a whole lot of tremor activity today. But if you look at over the past month, we've seen a lot. Check this number out. 13,685 epicenters of tremor. Now, this is not volcanic tremor, but this is, if you can imagine the 2 plates here, North American plate and the Juan de Fuca plate as a whole here, including those 2 other microplates, slowly moving past each other down below in the deeper areas. You pick up a vibrational frequency that is very low, and it will pick up as tremor. Now, not volcanic tremor, but it's just a slow frequency vibration from the 2 plates slowly going past each other down into the deeper regions. So when that happens, obviously, strain continues to build upstream, right, along the locked area of the Cascadia subduction zone, ultimately leading towards a 9.0 or greater earthquake here in the future. And by the way, the last one was 324 years ago. So, there's a lot of doom and gloom out here across the West Coast. We've been living in some gold times, right? Discovery of the gold, boom towns, everyone's making money, everyone's living the high life, everyone's got a Ferrari, so to speak, back in the, the gold rush days. But don't forget, geology, right? That's one of my major studies I'm studying right now. I'm trying to work towards my master's degree in physical science, and geology is a big time part of it. How did all these mountain ranges form? How did all these valleys form? How did all these volcanoes form? They weren't drawn up just from a simulator. They're due to tectonic forces out here. So one of these days we're going to see a large 9-pointer. One of these days we're going to see Mount St. Helens pop again, maybe even Mount Hood. Numerous volcanoes out here again. Any one of these are capable of producing a volcanic eruption, Mount Shasta included. So it's a matter of time before we see that big earthquake out here again across the Cascades. It's just a matter of time before we see the Southern California earthquake happen. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's the facts, and it's not going away. That's science, and that will happen again. So moving on past that, further out and about, out here across the Salt Lake City area, this region's seen a little bit of earthquake activity throughout the year. I'm thinking probably upwards of a couple hundred earthquakes or so around the Bluebell Study area. And I almost took a trip out here to study what was going on out here, but there's potentially some type of I don't know if there's some heated surfaces below down here or not. But it's a very interesting area because they have seen a lot of earthquake activity here since the 1st of January. This is only in the last month. If we were to go back, we'll go ahead and show that real quick here. Since about the 1st of January here. And we're going to draw a little rectangle out here on the map. Right around that area of the Great Salt Lake City area, north here in the Bluebell Study area. This region is of some highly interesting earthquake activity. I want to show you guys real quick. 263 earthquakes, right? In Utah. No way, that must be wrong. You're lying. No, I'm not lying. That's a lot of earthquake activity here. The latest one is at 3.4 I showed you guys there in the mix of earthquake activity. Prior to that, it's been a little sporadic, but back in, I think in the May time period, yeah, I think it was May is when we seen the intensity of the swarm out there. Hundreds of earthquakes occurring out there in that area. And I'm a little curious as to what the reasoning is, what's going on out here. There's not a whole lot of fault systems out here. There's some to the east here, but this specific area, I don't know. It could potentially be somewhat, maybe volcanic. I don't know. I do want to get out there and maybe look at this and investigate a little bit deeper, because most of these earthquakes have been occurring about 6 miles deep or so, where we would see some magma activity. So it's a little interesting activity out there in that region of the world. But goodness, look at the map today, folks. Tell me that everything is not on the ramp up right now. There's a lot of activity ramping up out here, and today alone, look at this activity. Today alone, we've seen 6 earthquakes here, including that 6-pointer. It looks like that 6-pointer set off a chain of events out here. And that kind of makes sense here. That's where we see the general plate stress out here across the area. The Pacific plate moves off to the west-northwest, and every earthquake that occurs out here adds further strain to the west along the plate boundary. And man, is that happening right now. 5s, multiple 5s out here across the plate boundary right now. One area that hasn't seen a tremendous amount of large-scale activity is the area around Solomon Islands. 6.4, Papua New Guinea area back in it looks like the 1st of September. But this specific area here, Solomon Islands, around this little bend here, is lacking somewhat earthquake activity, and it has been over the last couple months. So we'll watch that. It is definitely on the uptick out here. That is an undeniable. Look at that. Tell me the last time you've seen something like this on the Earthquake 3D globe literally within an hour of each other. I don't recall that. So we got some major plate adjustment going on out here, folks. Not even joking. Notice that 4.3 up here on the globe. That is actually an earthquake that occurred here along the Clear Lake volcanic field. And a lot of times that is under strain as well when there is that's funny, because when I checked the earthquake activity this morning, they reported that as a 4.1. They secretly snuck this in as a larger magnitude there across the geysers area. This, believe it or not, this region here sees a lot of earthquakes here on various days. There's a whole lot of hydrothermal plants out here, and back in I think when was that, 2015, 2016? Don't quote me, but there was a period of some upper 4s and 5s out here, which created some damage to a couple houses and communities out here, and they started suing. The folks there that had the damage started suing Calpine hydrothermal plant there, hydrothermal operations that are in charge of this. They may have changed their name by now. I don't know if they went bankrupt or not, but they got sued because there's a whole process involved here. They're creating earthquakes out here in the Lassen volcano, or not Lassen, but the Clear Lake volcanic field. Look at these hydrothermal plants out here. All these earthquakes occurring within the fields here. They know what's down below the surface, some heated areas. So there's a whole process involved where they inject raw sewage. I was down here a couple years ago. I wanted to see what the deal was, and everything's secured. But I did get close enough here to one of these secured facilities where I could smell raw sewage in the air. But they inject the raw sewage below into the heated areas and create some dry steam that create energy to power the folks of the San Francisco Bay Area, the northern San Francisco Bay Area. So, but also at the same time, I can't help but wonder if they're not poking a hole out here that may explode one day. You know, you poke enough holes in a pie crust with all that steam, eventually, pop goes the weasel, right? Goodness. But I'm not in charge of it. That's just a little theory. But yeah, there's definitely some earthquake activity happening out there today in a big fashion around these hydrothermal plants, and that is that's a fact, definitely. All right, let's see what else we got here across this area. I know I've been studying the West Coast here for a little bit. 1.7, Gladstone, New Jersey. Not a big earthquake, a little small earthquake out there. One earthquake out in the Nicaragua area, 4.2 coming in here within the last hour. We got a major unrest going on out here, folks, across the world right now. Not even joking. When things get active, they can get active, right? I mean, look at that. I need to really screen capture this because that is an impressive amount of earthquake activity that's been amping up out here across this area with the plate boundary. New Zealand, still kind of waiting on some further large-scale activity down there. It's been moderate to minor in terms of the multitude of quakes out here recently. Just some threes popping off with various magnitudes out here higher across the plate boundary, but eventually that is going to adjust as well. A little bit of swarming going on here across the Japan Trench, it looks like. Let's go over here and check it out, but man, that's honestly can't believe I can't remember the last time I seen elevated activity out here like this, folks. So could get interesting here over the next couple days. I think we're looking at an 8-pointer somewhere, whether it's Southern California or somewhere else. We should see an 8-pointer every year, if not every other year. And the last 8-pointer earthquake occurred back in 2021, 3 years ago. So we're overdue for an 8-pointer somewhere out here. There's the Japan earthquake activity, a lot of it ramping up this afternoon all around the area of Japan. Don't forget the subduction zone here across the area south of the mainland of Japan, where the Japanese government put out a mega quake warning. Upper 8 magnitude earthquake is expected here in the near future. That's according to the Japanese government. Across the Kumano Ridge, major subduction zone. Another earthquake down here into the New Caledonia area. Like I said, it's just popping left and right down here across this area. Hawaii, one would think here everything should be on the uptick out here across Hawaii because every area around the plate boundary is moving, right? The Pacific plate, it's a hot spot. Hawaii sits on that hot spot, or at least Hawaii is the hot spot. Not seeing anything major going on out here. 2.3 in the last hour. But aside from that, things are just a little minimal out there across the Kilauea volcano. Let me give a quick glance here at the Hawaii area, Kilauea volcano region on the USGS map here. Deformation data, because obviously what's going on below the surface will show at the surface area in terms of deformation, earthquake activity, and so on. Oh man, look at that. Goodness. I think this is that Mark Timothy was talking about here. Timothy emailed me here recently chatting about a huge spike in the inflation chart. And goodness, I would say that's a pretty good size one. So this right here, obviously we got an influx of further magma going on here below the surface. Take a look here. That's at the summit area. Tilt meter out here across the upper east rift zone, not so much. So it looks like we got more of a recharge going on here across the summit area. Most of our last couple magma intrusions or displacements from the summit area have been the original one a couple months back moved off here across this area to the southwest down towards the Lohi Seamount, and then we've seen another one out here across the southwest rift zone, which resulted in a periodic 10-hour long eruption out here across the Fisher event this year. And then more recently, a couple here across the upper east and middle east rift zone. So it's a very interesting scenario. Obviously, as I mentioned before, this land wasn't created on a simulator, like SimCity. It was created due to plate tectonics and geology. Eventually, this is going to form new land further to the southeast, and all these Hawaii islands will eventually get eroded and weathered down, as noted here on various other islands that used to be out here. This is, this very well out here could be the big island one day underneath the water. And with other areas of volcano out here, other areas of Hawaii underneath water. That's how it happens. That's geology and plate tectonics. But it doesn't happen in an instant. It does take a lot of time here, but that is the facts here. We see it. So maybe out here, see a new big island eventually. So it makes sense here to see some volcanic activity and elevated movement working its way southeastward. Let's see what else we got. It's just been a crazy day, folks. Philippines area southward, still seeing a bunch of movement here. A trail of deep activity and stronger events here across the area of the Mediterranean and Middle East areas. I don't recall, honestly, I don't recall the last time we've seen a whole bunch of elevated activity like this. And we haven't seen any major impacts to the Earth in terms of solar flares or CMEs. Got nothing to do with space weather activity. This has everything to do with convection below the surface, what's going on within the regions of the deeper levels of the Earth. So Turkey's seen a 5.0. That's the area that's seen that 7-pointer activity. Oh, was it last year or this year? Oh, man, goodness. Time's just passing by. I think it was earlier last year, if I recall right, that 7.8. There's a bunch of other earthquake activity out here as well during 2023. A little 5.0 occurring there today. Actually, that was last night, late last night. The Atlantic Ocean has gone absolutely quiet aside from a 4.0 way north of Greenland. I want to be cautious here, folks. I want everyone to be on guard here because we are seeing a lot of broad-scale activity. And please just don't get complacent. Southern California is not a place to be complacent, whether it's traffic or crime or anything else. Earthquake activity, right? Do not be complacent out here because 300 and something years of strain has been building up out here across the plate boundary. And when you get all this movement, it's not just 1 week of movement that we've seen elevated activity. It's the past 6 weeks or more that we've seen elevated earthquake activity out here as a whole in various areas around the plate boundary. That is nothing to joke around with. Yellowstone National Park, super volcano, right? You think something going on there? Well, let's take a look here. Actually, the Yellowstone area is one of the more quiet spots here I've seen in a long time. Aside from that little steam explosion that happened a couple months back, it builds up, right? There's obviously some heated areas below. There's a reason why there's geysers out here, because of the heated areas below. But occasionally we get these steam pockets building up here, moisture that seeps into the ground, and it finds its way below some harder material, and it just builds up from the heated areas below, and it creates these little explosions. Not volcanic activity, but steam explosions that happen out here. But earthquake activity, goodness, Yellowstone is nada. I haven't seen any major activity out there in quite a while in terms of earthquake swarming or any major uplift. Yellowstone is the least of our worries right now. I think we need to watch the Southern California area and various other regions around the globe. That is that's for sure. Space weather activity. Let's see what we got here. Flaring activity, minimal. Couple C flares here. Low grade C flares in the last 24 hours. There's our M flare, long duration M flare earlier yesterday, it looks like. But aside from that, no major roars in the forecast here, folks. The flare threat has dropped a little bit. 15% chance for X flare, M flare 90 or 55, C flare around 99% chance or so. We do have a number of active regions coming around the eastern limb here pretty soon. This is actually still, well, actually this was put out today, it looks like. But the UTC time, that makes it a little bit older here. We do have this massive active region here that's been thrown off very large CMEs here recently. There's been a number of large multiple explosions out there on the far side of the sun. I believe this is one of the areas here that looks like a very active region that will be visible here in the coming days, and that will be Earth facing here in about a week or so. So we'll watch this sunspot region. That's one of the former sunspots that were out here yesterday or last time around, maybe even a couple times prior to that, because these sunspots, they really don't disappear. They'll go around the far side of the sun, maybe weaken a little bit, and then they'll come back into view, strengthen, and then so on. But they get renamed every time they come back around the bend. So I always found that a little odd that they renamed the sunspot that was the former sunspot multiple times a new name. But that's how it is. As far as the tropics go, got a little bit of tropical development we're going to watch down there in the Gulf of Mexico as I put this forecast into motion here. Not anything significant at the moment. I mean, that in itself right there, that looks like maybe a hurricane going on. Let me bring up the National Hurricane Center here and see what we got. We're watching this right here. This system, disturbance 1. There's a 70% chance of cyclone formation here in the next 48 hours. That could spell a little bit of trouble as we head towards the next week time period. Some of those models are showing a little bit of strengthening going on off the east coast here of Texas, and a little bit of rapid development occurring into a hurricane as it heads towards Louisiana. So we'll check back on that, though, in a little bit. I don't want to cause too much panic out there, but it could be an area to watch here pretty closely, because we have a high percentage here of formation in the next 48 hours and also the next 7 days. So all right, I'm going to bounce out of here, folks. I hope everyone has a good night. Just don't be complacent. You know, we live on a very active planet in terms of geology and the whole plate tectonic world out here. Everything's moving around, right? Very slowly. But throughout generations there, some of these fault systems and plate boundaries can accumulate enough strain to produce these big earthquakes. And Southern California, I was hearing about it when I was a kid, and that was many, many years ago, that Southern California here is well overdue for a big one. We're not talking about the Whittier earthquake or other smaller, moderate earthquake that occurred in the 90s. We're talking about an 8.1 out here. That's it's in the near future. And I think we're seeing some of the signs of it out here recently. Not only in just areas of proximity here to the San Andreas Fault, but an overall picture here. It's painting an overall picture here of something big happening out here across Southern California. So just be prepared, folks. I'm one that always keeps a lot of stock on hand. Water is not that expensive, right? You can pick up a case of 36 bottled waters for a few bucks. That is the most important item I think you're going to want. And also, the canned food. You always want to make sure that you have some type of backup plan here, because when the big one hits, I guarantee you the grocery store is not going to be there. And if it is, it won't last for long with all the looting and whatnot that will take place down there in the area of Southern California. So, we'll watch this throughout the night, folks. Tonight could be the night. Tomorrow could be the night. It could happen in the next 10 years. But all I know is the elevated activity out here is a sign. It's a big sign that we need to be on guard out here for potentially something bigger happening. We'll catch you guys back out here in the morning. Stay safe out there, folks.